the absolute lack of foresight and team building on this, like, it's ludicrous to me, because for all the issues that the Cowboys have and the processes that break down all the other stuff, they draft really well.
They do.
So to your point, why wouldn't you want to maybe trade off some pieces, stockpile some more picks?
That's what I'm saying,
increase your chances for the future, because this is arguably a lost season at this point for the Dallas Cowboys.
Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast, presented by Verizon. The NFL powered by Verizon 5G. And man, Monday felt like it lasted about a decade. I cannot believe it's been just 24 hours since we posted the recap episode. A zany 24 hours in the NFL. Started off late Sunday night with the Las Vegas Raiders cleaning out half of their offensive coaching staff. That rolled right into the news Monday morning that the Saints had fired head coach Dennis Allen. Regime change in New Orleans is underway. The Arizona Cardinals traded for Denver pass rusher Baron Browning. A Sunday night game got flexed. The Chargers and the Bengals move into prime time a couple weeks from now. Haven't even mentioned one of the best Monday night games of the year. Chiefs Bucs goes to overtime. Patrick Mahomes emerges with a win, just as he usually does. I think I got everything. We're going to get to it. Don't worry. Loaded show for y'all. We've got Carmen Vitale of FoxSports.com coming on to talk a little Bucs Chiefs. We'll get into some trade deadline speculation. We've also got our midseason awards show. Carmen and I are going to sit down, look at the major NFL awards as they stand roughly halfway through the season, give our thoughts, give our projections for what might be coming in the second half of the year. So much to get to. Really fun show for y'all. But as we always like to start things off, we had a chance to catch up with Jay Glazer on Monday morning. He had a chance to talk to Dennis Allen in New Orleans, talk about the coaching changes with the Saints and the Raiders, among several other topics. So much to get into with Jay. That's how we start the show.
All right, Jay, always excited to talk to you, man, but maybe this week more than most, just with the amount of stuff we've got to get to. We're recording this, I don't know, give or take 24 hours ahead of the NFL trade deadline. I definitely want to ask you about that. But also a busy late night and early morning coming out of week 9. The most recent news, the Saints become the second team to move on from their head coach. They fired Dennis Allen after a really rough loss to Carolina on Sunday afternoon. I saw you tweeted just minutes before we recorded this that you had a chance to talk to Dennis Allen. How did that all come about, and what do you think the Saints do from here?
Well, Mickey Loomis, who's actually a big Dennis Allen fan, walked in, told him, hey, this is coming from the owner. And Dennis has a lot of love in there because he was a defensive coordinator. And I got to say, when I talked to Dennis this morning, there was no resentment, no bitterness. He said, love that place, love the organization, love the city. And he really does. And he's not sure what he's going to do moving forward. But he said, I understand it too. It's a results-based business. They have so many injuries over there. It's kind of hard to really, judge a team when you're down to your fifth and sixth corners and your third and fourth quarterback and your receivers are out, and oh my gosh, just there's been a couple teams this year where, you just see they're decimated by injury. The Cowboys are just decimated. The Rams have been for a little bit, right? But the Saints and Dallas are really two teams that have really taken it on the chin, I think, with injuries this year. And as a result of this, you need continuity in teams. And when you have so many guys injured, it's hard to get that continuity. And unfortunately, the head coach is the one who ends up suffering in the end.
It is. It's a results-based business, like you said, but it's so easy to imagine a world where the Saints are in the thick of this division chase. It is. There's some irony to the sense that this looked like a really interesting team. Even the first couple of losses before the wheels really fell off, it looked like the Saints had some potential. I don't think going into the season I would have been surprised by a coaching change in New Orleans, but in mid-September, I was pretty high on this team.
Well, it's amazing too. We looked at it and said, "Man, the Saints were really tough." Everybody's talking about Clint Kubiak being the next head coach, and all of a sudden, Taysom Hill first goes down, and I think that really hurts the way that offense runs. He does so much over there for that team. Then obviously Derek Carr going down. Then again, so many guys on defense going down, receivers going down. It was one after the other. It's hard to contend when you're working with your 70th guys.
Darren Rizzi is going to get the shot as the interim head coach there. I mean, it feels like there's so many moving parts with the Saints. We joke every year about how they've got to get under the salary cap. Derek Carr's got big cap numbers coming up in the future. Is this a situation where maybe Rizzi is auditioning to get that job, or do you see like major sweeping changes coming for the Saints?
Depends how Darren Rizzi does. I can't answer the question because I don't know what's going to happen here. Obviously, somebody does well, you got to look inside that in-house. But usually when they go with the special teams coach, it's because, hey, we want a guy who's just going to have, special teams guys actually, they're the only guys on the team who really touch everybody. Right? They touch both sides of the ball. And Darren's a fiery guy. He's very well respected in there. But no, I think this is something, if he doesn't pull out some miraculous playoff run, I'm sure they're going to open this up.
Elsewhere, late Sunday night, I was like out here on the West Coast, I was getting into bed as this was happening, but Antonio Pierce making major changes to the Raiders coaching staff, offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, O-line coach James Craig, quarterbacks coach Rick Scangarello. I mean, basically all of the major players on the offensive side of the coaching staff are out. It's interesting to me. I mean, look, Antonio Pierce is just halfway through his first full season as the head coach, but these are major moves. I mean, what does that signal about where this is going in Vegas?
Yeah, obviously we just talked about continuity. There was none there. And, at quarterback, you're just like, what do we do? But they knew it going in. I think draft-wise, they were hoping that the Washington quarterback kind of dropped down to them, who went to Atlanta.
Penix. Yeah, Michael Penix.
All of a sudden, they got him, and it's like, oh, man. It's not what they're expected to end up not, coming away with the quarterback. And when they didn't come away with the quarterback, they knew there were going to be problems this year. They knew it. I remember being in camp this year. It was just frustration because they didn't have, somebody in that quarterback position that they thought they were going to be able to count on. But even that, with the coordinator position, they had Cliff Kingsbury, a shot at him. They had a shot at Chip Kelly. And, they kind of Raiders got in their own way for those to happen. And they bring in Luke Getsy, who they didn't really know. And it, didn't really make a lot of sense at that time. And, but I think the Raiders right now are sitting there going, hey, we got to make sure we don't win because we need that number one pick of the draft.
It's a valid point. Although, I mean, when you're talking about jobs being on the line, I'm always interested by that juxtaposition of draft position is important, but these guys are coaching for their livelihoods as well. I'm curious about this. I mean, there's two ways to take this. It's either that Antonio Pierce has the leeway and the latitude to do what he thinks he needs to generate a spark, or Antonio Pierce looking for a way to keep the pressure off of him or get something to change before it costs him his job.
No, AP wants to win. Absolutely not. AP wants to win. This is not him saying I'm going to try and scapegoat somebody else to save my job. It's not. And I know how he's wired. I've known him since he was a player. It's not really how he's wired.
It's going to be interesting to watch just with that much turnover in the middle of the season to see how the Raiders rebound. All right. Like I said, I wanted to talk to you about trade deadline. I'm not asking you to predict the future, but I'm very curious by the number of teams that are in a bad way. There are 9 2-win teams in the NFL right now. I don't have the official data, but that is more teams that are well below 500 than I'm typically used to seeing around this time of year. Do you think that leads to extra activity, or do you think that we're kind of tapering off already with the amount of trades we've already seen?
No, there's a lot of teams calling around for receivers, and those are teams who are in the thick of it, like Pittsburgh, and then there are teams like Dallas, who is also that's not in the thick of it, but they know, man, we got to find a number 2 receiver. So they're in it. There are Chargers, the Texans looking for receivers. But they're going to look at those 2-win teams to see who they can go pick off there. And Adam Thielen, and Mingo, somebody along those lines, right? But there's not a lot out there. Slayton from the Giants. I think the bigger names we've already kind of seen. And then you look at defensive end, right? Obviously, the Lions, even though they did a great job yesterday, they're in talks with the Browns for Zadarius Smith for a later mid-round pick. But I know Atlanta's looking for a pass rusher I know Arizona is looking for a pass rusher. So I think you're going to kind of see guys do that. What you're not really going to see this year are those monster names. At least I don't think. It could change. Because I know there are teams that were calling about some monster names. And in one in particular, team I just talked to said, I'm going to go call everybody back saying, no, we're not doing this. Because also I think you're limiting the number of teams you could do it with right now because of lack of cap space. It's kind of smarter if you want to trade one of those bigger name guys in the offseason where teams are able to do more with their cap space. You get more suitors involved, if you will. But I don't think you're going to see, Christian McCaffrey's and the Von Millers and the Jalen Ramseys and, those big trades we've had, Jimmy Garoppolo midseason, things like that. And I think a lot of those players were, a few of those players were like, they kind of steered the ship. They were ready to get out of here, ready to move on. They kind of did it with those teams. Those teams were in agreement for them to do it. And I'm not seeing a lot of those, players right now where they're trying to do it or in those situations where you're going to have these monster names. But again, it only takes one team to say, we're going to overpay. We're going to make an offer you can't refuse and to try to do it. But also, like I said, a lot of these teams just don't have the cap room to try to do moves like that.
Yeah, it takes, you have to check so many boxes to pull off a trade like that. But interested to see where this goes. Like I said, we're about 24 hours out. Knowing how this industry works, I'm sure something crazy will happen like 15 minutes after I get off a Zoom with you. We'll see how that goes. Couple more things I wanted to touch on with you. For starters, I mean, you had the report Sunday morning, well before the game, about the Chicago Bears' decision to take Tyreek Stevenson out of the starting lineup for the beginning of that game. That was before the Bears just looked absolutely disastrous in that loss to Arizona. I mean, just not a good performance all the way around. Where do the vibes stand with Chicago? I mean, I get it's tough to rebound from that loss to Washington, but they did it about as poorly as you possibly could.
Yeah, and I think in a situation like this, that needed to be a teachable moment because a moment like that can deflate your team moving forward. And the Bears look deflated. And even the way they handled Tyreek Stevenson, I know that, look, my story, absolutely. He got benched, pulled himself out of practice, walked through practice. It's a practice. Unexcused, without anybody knowing, went in. I know somebody had to go get him. But even at that situation, even like yesterday, they're almost making him out like he was the victim of this. He's not at all. Okay? This has to be a moment, too, where they stepped up and said, whoa, no. You're not going to punish us because of something that happened to us during the game. But by the way, there was a Bears source of mine said, do you think this, have you seen guys come back for this? Absolutely. Now I'm in the fight game too. I've had a ton of teammates of our fighters. They get knocked out and they come back and they have championship runs. It doesn't have to be a professional death sentence. You can come back. Okay.
Very quietly, Bryce Young is playing well since returning from his benching.
But that's what needed to happen here. Yeah. You need to say, hey man, I got to take my punishment like a man, okay, and show that to my teammates. So more doesn't happen there. And I know there's other reports saying, well, it wasn't a divisive thing. People I talked to in there were not happy about it at all. And I know all of us have sources. So, kind of both could be true. Somebody could hear one thing from one person, but I know what I heard from several people in there. But also it goes back to he's not the victim here. The team is the victim. And it could be a great teachable moment for him saying, hey, you know what? I didn't handle this right. I did hang my teammates out to dry during that. I needed to do more to kind of earn their trust back. And I need to go above and beyond. And there's nothing wrong with a young man saying, I'm going to go above and beyond and show you guys. I'm going to grow up from this. I'm going to mature from this. And my mistakes are not going to be your problem. That's what you have to do. And there's just got to be kind of accountability in there. And we'll see what happens with them moving forward. But again, you can see the lingering effects of something that was so deflating. And, there's a lot of guys there's a lot of veterans in that building saying, man, we're not going to play forever. Like, we need to be able to come together now because they do have some good pieces to come together now. But, it's mindset. And I hope that, again, it becomes teachable for that mindset.
One last thing I wanted to ask you about. Obviously, we talked all last week about the Colts' decision to move to just make the switch to Joe Flacco from Anthony Richardson. did not go very well against the Minnesota Vikings in Flacco's first start after that decision. Do you think that prompts the Colts to switch back? Or do you stick the course with Joe Flacco? I mean, I know this is supposed to be a chance to reset for Anthony Richardson, but when you score, what was it, 3 points on offense in your first game, I'm curious about the decisions in that building coming up this week.
Well, we just talked about teachable moments and what they were really hoping for Anthony Richardson. They looked at it going, man, we hope that was a teachable moment where he understands now, okay, there's so much more that goes in the quarterback position than being athletic, making some great throws. And there's so much that goes in that position. The dude quotient, so big at that quarterback position. And that's what Joe Flacco exudes. So, I think obviously yesterday wasn't a good showing for Joe Flacco, but they all look at it, just his body of work this year, last year, what he's done in the past. I know they don't want to judge him just off this one game, but what they're hoping for is that Joe can step up, that Anthony could really learn. Like last week, he was doing everything he needed to. He was walking around basically apologizing to the team and saying, that's never going to happen with me again. He was showing up early, leaving late, everything that you need to happen. And I think their mindset is hopefully he can continue to understand what goes in this position and then grow from that and become that guy. They didn't want this to be, hey, he's done over here, without a doubt. But I also think that they'd like to have him sit and learn and be able to get experience and mature. And there was a plan to put him in certain packages later on when he understands a little bit more of this. They weren't there yesterday with it. So, I would think and hope that they would look at it and go, we had a plan. We understand this kid needs to learn more. And let's not do knee-jerk reactions based on one bad game from Joe Flacco. Because I think we've all seen more of Joe Flacco and what he could do. So
fair.
I think it's more about Anthony Richardson's growth, though. And, what's the smartest thing to do to make sure he grows? Because if you put a young quarterback in there who doesn't have all this experience and it's just up and down, up and down, up and down, that could hurt your growth. That could stunt that growth. So you still look at him. They still believe him. As a kid, they all love him. But there's things you got to learn from. And by the way, I said to you that somebody in the Bears said to me, hey, can people come back from this? Absolutely. But the same thing, look at the quarterback position, Geno Smith. You can too, right? It's never too late. It's never too late, man. The more you work on between your ears and more you work behind your rib cage and the more you work on that maturity and the more you look at football like, man, I've got to outwork the world and just be relentless and wear people down and put more in the professional craft, the more you can grow. Like I always look at guys, how we grow. And again, I've trained a million fighters and NFL players, right? And I never care how someone starts. I never care. I only care how their growth is. And I can say how we're finishing, but especially like in mixed martial arts, we'll take people who are pure boxers and we gotta teach them wrestling, teach them jiu-jitsu, teach them the MMA end of it. And they have to grow. So they may lose fights early on. I don't really care about that. I just want them to learn and, learn a certain mindset and how to wear people out. And same with football players. Like there's a reason why it's called developing talent, right? You develop guys, you develop players. And same thing over here. It's all about development and coaching people.
Motivational Mondays with Jay Glazer, man. I'm applying this stuff to my own life as well.
I love being an insider, but man, I love coaching more than anything. And you can ask all my players and all my fighters, and I get nothing out of it except I get to see people become great. Nothing. All the years I've trained guys too, all the money that comes to us goes to all my fighters and goes to all my coaches. I've had none of it. I take zero. I just love to see people become great. That's all. And as hard as I've gotten on my players and my fighters over the year, every one of them will tell you I care about them. I'm not doing it to break them down. I'm not doing it to embarrass anybody. I just want to see people be great. That is it.
It's awesome, man.
Thank
I
you,
really
man.
appreciate it. Look, I know your phone's gonna be blowing up over the next 24 hours. Try to find some downtime, I suppose, here between now and the trade deadline. But if you get anything juicy, also don't hesitate to reach out either.
Brother, appreciate you, man.
As always, love talking to you, man. Chat soon.
We touched on the trade deadline with Jay Glazer, and now to dive into it in more detail, we are joined by the one, the only, Fox Sports reporter Carmen Vitale, hopping on for most of the rest of the show. We're going to talk We got trade deadline. We got a Monday Night Football recap. We're going to do our midseason awards as well.
Yeah.
Thank you as always for being here.
Of course.
We run the risk of this aging poorly because this is hitting
story of our lives.
This is hitting feeds on Tuesday morning. It is the NFL trade deadline. Yeah. Surely the only thing of consequence happening
on Tuesday, November 5th.
On Tuesday, November the 5th. We got to figure out what's going on with the trade deadline, what's left to get to. I talked about this with Jay. I'm just gonna say it. I sort of feel like the big time hay is in the barn with this trade deadline. And if all hell is breaking loose as I'm waking up tomorrow, I'll just deal with that. But look around the landscape and some of the moves that have already been made. Short of a blockbuster that comes completely out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already seen Deontay Johnson get moved. We know DeAndre Hopkins is doing well in Kansas City, having watched Monday Night Football.
Good Lord.
Amari Cooper's in Buffalo. Cam Robinson is in Minnesota. We're going to talk about some of these, but we've already seen a lot of these moves get made. Like, what else are you anticipating here on Tuesday, if anything?
Yeah. I think that, first of all, you talked about receivers, but you did not talk about my dude, Cam Robinson, slotting in beautifully at left tackle for the Minnesota Vikings and not allowing a sack in his first game there after just, getting there midweek.
I knew you were going to handle it for me.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Did you see him get the game ball on Sunday night?
I did. I was about to go there. I love that, it takes a tremendous amount of gumption to come in midweek and start practicing with a brand new team and then have to assimilate into an offensive line that is already, so used to playing together. That's a unit that has to work in tandem with each other. And and Cam Robinson just slotted in beautifully. There's really no replacing a guy like Christian Darrisaw. I think that he's a top 3 left tackle in the league. But Cam Robinson did a wonderful job and was rewarded for it by Kevin O'Connell in the locker room afterwards. So there's that.
All of the trades we've seen to this point anyway they've scratched that itch so perfectly. I was nervous for the Minnesota Vikings when Christian Darrisaw went down. Identified Cam Robinson almost immediately. They slot him in. He might not be a top 3 left tackle in the NFL, but it looks like he's going to give that offense a chance to continue being what it was. That's the trades.
That's all you can ask for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trades I'm the most excited about are minor buys for big time gains. I mean, I touched on Amari Cooper. You send a mid round pick. I think they sent a 3rd to Cleveland in exchange for Amari Cooper, which granted he hasn't even done a whole lot for them as of now. He sat out of the Bills' win against Miami the other day. But he did have 66 yards and a touchdown in his debut for the Bills. And when you've got Josh Allen playing the way he's playing, it's just one extra weapon, one extra guy who you can count on.
What I thought was really even more so than his direct impact was the fact that then he grabs attention away and it allows guys like Keon Coleman to shine or Khalil Shakir to shine in Buffalo, where, you could afford to pay all the attention in the world to the rookie in Keon Coleman. And now it's like, oh no, you got to go deal with Amari Cooper. So let's open things up.
You're just shifting everybody one rung down the ladder.
Yep.
So now if the best or second best cornerback on the opponent is worried about Amari Cooper, that's a more favorable matchup for Khalil Shakir or Keon Coleman. Everybody's going to have a better time. And it's very similar with what we're seeing with what we just saw in Kansas City. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in the Monday night recap, but DeAndre Hopkins, he's already most of the way to his yardage total from his time in Tennessee after 2 games. And one of those games was right after he arrived in town. He went off against the Tampa Bay Bucs on Monday night. And it's the same thing where Patrick Mahomes trusts you downfield, which is more than he can say about most
instantaneously too, which we haven't really seen so far this season, like where a receiver comes in. We didn't even see that with Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, like where Aaron Rodgers was just connecting with Devontae Adams like that quickly. And how long did they have playing with each other back in the day? Like, for two guys that have never played together to come together that quickly is just, it's a testament to both of them. But Patrick Mahomes, I think, a lot.
Can I
He's
just
lucky
say
with
it's a
it.
testament to how long the NFL season feels that I didn't forget Devontae Adams got traded to the Jets, but man, it just feels like a lot of stuff has
I
happened
mean,
since then.
with the Jets specifically.
no, yeah.
There's been a lot of stuff that's happened.
There's been 6 more twists and turns in that story since Devontae Adams got traded. But that just goes back to my point. We've seen like all these big name guys that are supposedly on the block for the most part.
Right.
I know you're going to talk about a guy in a minute that is still with his original team, but for the most part, we were wondering about Deontay Johnson. We were wondering about Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Amari, all these guys. It's already happened for the most part. So I'm sure there is some news coming before this NFL trade deadline, but I wonder how much of it will be earth-shattering, put it that way.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily know that, like you said, we're going to see that, but that doesn't preclude stuff from happening that I think will, again, allow teams to continue the level of play that we've gotten used to. For instance, the Lions look unstoppable offensively. Their defense has hung in there. When Brian Branch got ejected from the game against the Packers, I was like, oh God, this is going to be really interesting. And that defense is going to have to adjust tremendously to not having Brian Branch. Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph are two of the highest graded safeties, according to PFF, in the league. They're literally two of the top 3. Xavier McKinney is the second one, by the way. So they were all in that game. And Brian Branch is so crucial to what they are able to do defensively, especially, and this kind of sounds weird or counterintuitive, but especially with Aiden Hutchinson going out, you have to figure out how to get pressure in different ways. You have to hold your coverage lanes a little bit more. You have to just kind of mix things up. And with the versatility of Brian Branch allows you to do that. But I don't know if that's how you want to live if you're Detroit, or if you can sustainably live that way. You need more help up front. And we're not giving enough credit to Aleem McNeil and DJ Reader on the interior, but there is no replacing Aiden Hutchinson. But a guy like Zadarius Smith coming in could make a huge difference for the defense overall. Every single level would benefit from having another pass rusher in there. As good as some of these other guys are doing in Detroit, you still need... You need a threat on the outside.
That is one veteran name that we keep hearing about that we'll see leading up to the final day. He's still with the Cleveland Browns. Also worth pointing out, there was talk swirling before kickoff between the Bucs and the Chiefs that Kansas City was talking to the New Orleans Saints about Marshawn Lattimore. Obviously, the Saints just fired Dennis Allen. They've lost 7 games in a row.
I'd expect them to be sellers.
I would expect them to be sellers, except they're the Saints. They would rather sign guys to extensions than trade or cut people. Like they're going
to have to get cap compliant somehow. They do it every year. I'm not actually worried about the Saints because this is how they live, and they have lived for years on end. But like at some point, don't you have to just blow it up, start over? Make it so that this is a more sustainable model than trying to like scramble and get cap compliant every season.
I feel like
when you're so far over. It's not even like they're just a little over. They're like $60 million over.
I feel like I've been saying that every year since Drew Brees retired. I think
no, you're right.
The Saints would rather,
but you can't.
They'd rather try to sort their finances out slowly while chasing 8 and 9 than blow it up. I'm not saying that's the right call, but that's what their track record suggests. That, you know what? That's a wonderful conversation for the offseason when we figure out who the Saints are going to hire to be their next head coach. Here and now, it actually reminds me of another team I wanted to talk about, because I am curious if the news we got on Monday in Dallas changes anything about their outlook. We haven't had a chance to mention this yet, but Dak Prescott officially has a major hamstring issue. It sounds like he's going to miss multiple games. Cowboys aren't committing to anything yet, but they're not ruling out injured reserve depending on what Dak hears from his second opinion as the week goes along. I've paid attention to the Cowboys. I've covered the Cowboys for a decade of my life at this point. When I tell you, I cannot imagine them being sellers at the trade deadline. It goes against the entire ethos of their organization, which is
Right.
be relevant at all costs.
Right.
But you're 3-5. They're not a good football team. I'd go as far as to say they're a boring football team.
Yeah.
And now
They're inconsequential.
Dak Prescott, and on top of that, Dak Prescott looks like he's about to miss at least 2, if not as many as 4+ games. If I were them, I would consider calling around. I'm not telling anybody to have a fire sale, but there are veterans on this team on expiring deals, whether you want to talk about Oso Odigizua, their defensive tackle. Jordan Lewis is having a really nice season at nickelback. Yeah. Every team in the league could use an extra corner. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
This one hurts me to say out loud. He's going to go into the Hall of Fame at some point, but if somebody had a need for Zach Martin, he's nearing the end of his career. People have speculated about a possible retirement. If somebody was interested, if I were the Cowboys, I would say, if you want a shot to go chase a Super Bowl ring, this feels like a fitting time to do it. But I cannot.
But then you have Jerry Jones talking after the game about being buyers.
I cannot for the life of me imagine the Cowboys doing this. If anything, maybe they'll go add a number 2 receiver or some extra depth on the defensive line.
Now you want to add a number 2 receiver? Like, just the absolute lack of foresight and team building on this. Like, it's ludicrous to me, because for all the issues that the Cowboys have and the processes that break down all the other stuff, they draft really well.
They do.
So to your point, why wouldn't you want to maybe trade off some pieces, stockpile some more picks?
That's what I'm saying,
increase your chances for the future, because this is arguably a lost season at this point for the Dallas Cowboys.
I don't know that the Cowboys have it in them to admit that a season is lost when you're only 3-5. And that's what is going to make tomorrow so interesting. If Jerry Jones were here, he'd probably remind you that falling to 3-4 and eventually 3-5 is what prompted the Amari Cooper trade that saved their season way back in 2018. But this team is not that team.
No.
That team had rushing champion Ezekiel Elliott, not benched for skipping meetings Ezekiel Elliott. I don't know. I mean, maybe you could paint me a optimistic picture of the Cowboys when you talk about Micah Parsons and Deron Bland coming back from injury. And if Dak Prescott was healthy, I'd be willing to buy it. But if he's going to miss a significant amount of time, I don't see it, man. And I think the Cowboys are projected to get 4 compensatory picks in next year's draft.
Mm-hmm.
If you could add another 2 picks on top of that by parting ways with some guys who aren't going to be part of the big picture here, I would do it.
I don't think anybody's arguing with that. It's just
Dallas
the reality.
Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys are going to argue.
Yeah, no,
with it.
The reality is arguing with you. The reality of who the Dallas Cowboys are and how they behave is arguing with you at this point. But
I can't help but wonder, but I think I know what to expect. Like I said, I think it goes against the Cowboys' DNA.
I mean, we had this
punt
exact
on relevancy.
Same conversation about free agency. We had way back in March. We always have these conversations, I feel like, where they keep talking about, oh, we're set. Oh, we've got enough talent. And Jerry Jones literally just said that this week, that they have the guy, he believes in the guys in the locker room and that they have all of the talent and they have winners and they have this, that, and the other. It's a willingness to not see. It's a willful ignorance.
Well, yes, it's the perfect phrase for it. I can't wait until Tuesday. In the future, when you're listening to this, you listening at home will know, did the Cowboys sell? Or the even less surprising outcome would be if they find a way to buy at the trade deadline. however misguided an idea that
Is
might
Jerry
seem.
Jones going to use the example of Cooper Rush stepping in for Dak
Yes.
Prescott and being like, "Oh, look,
Yeah,
Cooper Rush kept us afloat."
He's 5-1 as the Cowboys starter when he's been called upon.
And to which I would say, who did Cooper Rush have on his offense
A lot more
during that time?
A lot more to work with than the current version of the Cowboys do.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. We'll see whatever happens with the trade deadline. We'll be sure to catch you all up on it on Thursday. But for now, let's talk some Monday Night Football.
Oh boy,
It's always weird with the Kansas City Chiefs.
it's so weird.
And it always ends in a Kansas City Chiefs win. They get the OT win over Tampa Bay, 30-24. Game that looked like they were kind of going to cruise away with until all of a sudden the
Kate Otten
Bucs
scores. There's some rumbling in the.
Bucs did a fantastic job of rallying in the second half to make a game of this.
Forcing overtime.
Had a chance to tie / maybe win it. I want to talk to you about that in a minute.
Okay. Do you know? Okay.
Some theatrics at the end of this game, but the Bucs tie it with 30 seconds, give or take, to play.
33.
The Chiefs get to over
Yeah.
27 seconds to play.
Yeah, 27. Yeah, you said I never mind.
I said 30, give or take, I believe.
You did. Okay. There they didn't take enough time off the clock is basically what I was flashing back to, and it just threw me for a loop. Okay.
The most amazing part about this was as soon as it gets to overtime, the Chiefs just flip this switch, man. Like, it reminds me, I think Joe Buck said on the broadcast, like it's like a street paver just rolling down the street. It reminds me of like a superhero in the comic books or a TV show where you get to the cliffhanger at the end and you're like, our heroes are in trouble. What will they do? And they get out of it. Of course they do, every single time.
They had no. There wasn't even like urgency.
No. It was the most methodical drive of the night.
Yes.
In
it was
overtime.
So like incredibly surgical, efficient. The Chiefs are the third team in NFL history, by the way, with 7 comeback wins in the first 8 games of the season. That's according to Fox Sports Research.
7 of their 8 wins. They're 8-0.
They have 7 comeback wins in their first 8 games.
It's unbelievable.
Because they've all been in 1-score games. This one is no different.
This is the most stressful.
Just goes back to the Chiefs not playing a normal game at all.
No, they don't play normal games. But that overtime period, you realize, first of all, Patrick Mahomes feels as back as he's ever been. I don't know that he actually went away, but the numbers just haven't matched up.
He even had an ankle injury for added motivation to complete the whole we're back. Travis Kelce had a career high 14 catches tonight.
So many places you could go with the Chiefs. Well, yeah, in overtime, they got to third down 1 time. That's how good they were in the overtime period. Kelce, 3 catches for 26 yards to get him down on the goal line. Their only third down was Kareem Hunt's game-winning run to get into the end zone. That's how efficient they were. Mahomes hurts his ankle on one of his patented, ridiculous pitch throws. You realize how many of his most iconic plays have come against the Bucs, by the way? He has this flip toss to Samaje Perine tonight.
I know he baited Levante David down and then just flips it over the top of him.
He had that ridiculous play on the pitch to, I believe it was Clyde Edwards-Helaire back in 2022. He did this to the Buccaneers when Tom Brady was still there. And then I know they lost that Super Bowl to your former employer, but he had the fully parallel to the ground throw.
That was incomplete, by the way.
It's still one of the most amazing things I've ever seen a quarterback do.
It's funny because I've talked to Will Golston about who was the one that was tackling Patrick Mahomes on that play, and I've talked to Will about it, and he's just like, I don't get it. First of all, I don't know how he let go of the ball, and that was even a question. But 2, why are you making a big deal out of it? Because he didn't complete it, but it was still one of the most incredible athletic feats that I've seen.
Week after week, this dude who wears number 15 for the Kansas City Chiefs.
I can't even be salty, like you said. The Bucs,
he goes out and does this shit on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And now he's got, we referenced him earlier in the show. He's got DeAndre Hopkins in the fold. He said afterward he trusts DeAndre to go win one-on-ones. 8 for 86 and 2 touchdowns. He had that disgusting contested catch. That's That's all that's been missing is somebody that Patrick Mahomes can trust to make plays down the field, because ironically, it even happened in this game. Remember how this game started?
Yeah.
Xavier Worthy missing a touchdown because he just had careless footwork by the sideline.
Right. Couldn't get both feet inbounds. What's really interesting too is I don't know that Patrick Mahomes has ever really had a receiver like DeAndre Hopkins where you completely trust him in those 50-50 balls, because yeah, Tyreek Hill could get you down the field, but it certainly wasn't because he was a big body dude that's going to go up and contest a catch with a DB. That's not who Tyreek Hill is. So it's very interesting now for Mahomes to be able to throw up a prayer but be confident that his guy's going to come down with it. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins on that the catch that you're talking about had like 3 defenders around him. I mean, there's no reason that you should throw that football. And yet Patrick Mahomes did, and it set them up for a touchdown. It's wild.
This is not as exciting of a build as what we got so used to with Tyreek Hill, but the Chiefs, and the scary thing is they were this efficient before DeAndre Hopkins and before Travis Kelce sort of, started rounding into form. But now that you can count on Kelce again, not that the Chiefs ever didn't, but you know what I mean. Now that Kelce is producing at the level that we expect of him, put it that way.
Yeah, I would like to be crystal clear that you or I, neither of us, ever thought we're worried about Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes or the Chiefs at large, even before the season, even as the season started to get going and we didn't really have a lot of answers and a lot of questions. I won't bet against the Chiefs.
And now, that's been my attitude for 7 weeks. And now they are producing at a level that backs it up.
I know.
Kareem Hunt had 100 yards on the night.
There's just no doubt in my mind that this was going to happen.
They are terrifyingly efficient. But all right, cool. They're the best team in the NFL. Shocker of shockers. Incredible insight. On the flip side of this, number one, I am impressed by the way the Buccaneers have responded since Mike Evans and Chris Godwin got injured in the same game. I feel like the NFL community kind of left them for dead. And to be fair, they have lost both of these games that they've played since then, but looking far more competent than I think a lot of people gave them credit for. They had a chance to win this game. We talked about it. You get down to the end zone. And we joked about this before we recorded. This is the second time we've had the Bucs on Monday Night Football, and the second time we're talking about Todd Bowles' decision-making at the end of games. Against Baltimore, it was, why is Chris Godwin still playing?
Right.
Tonight, or Monday night, it's, why didn't you burn more time at the end of this thing? Because you're going to wind up giving the ball to Patrick Mahomes. And then when they do score with 27 seconds to play, should they have gone for 2? You know Todd Bowles better than most.
I do.
You can't say you're surprised, at least.
No, I'm not. And I'm going to tell you why. It has everything to do with the fact that he is a defensive head coach and he does not mind the ball being in the hands of the defense. And in a lot of ways would prefer it to be that way at the end of a game. And I think that drives a lot of decision making when it comes to defensive head coaches at large, because their side of the ball, what does it say about them as coaches if they don't put their trust in that side of the ball? If that makes sense. I also you look at kind of the analytics and, you get all nerdy about all of this kind of stuff. But to be fair, there are departments in all of these teams that are just based on analytics and situational football and looking at the probability of certain things. There wasn't a whole lot of difference between win probability, whether you kicked the extra point or you went for 2.
Right.
It was a negligible difference. And again, when you have faith in your defense, and to be fair, up until that point, it was warranted. I understand why, it was only a brief thought to go for 2. But I mean, I get the other side of this. Don't get me wrong. It seems like a lot easier to you're going to have to take a risk either way.
One play. One play to very likely beat Patrick Mahomes on the road.
You're going to have you're going to have some level of risk regardless. Even if you do kick the extra point, which they did, then you leave it up to chance on whether or not you get the ball. Like, say you do stop the Chiefs, which they did. You then leave the coin toss in overtime up to complete chance. And we've seen overwhelmingly that the team that is able to start with the ball ends up winning in overtime more often than not.
Happened on Monday night.
As happened on Monday night. So there's risk involved in all of this is what I'm getting at here. So you have to decide whether or not you have to decide which risk to take. And the Bucs took that risk. But then I have to say, all right, say they do go for 2 there, and you'd still give Patrick Mahomes 20 to 25 seconds to get down the field. At that point, then he is that much more motivated to go win the game right then and there. And it's not a 1-for-1.
You do have to take opponent aggression into these.
Like, you're
going
to be way more aggressive because you have to be. You don't have the choice to play for overtime at that point. You don't have the luxury of doing so. You have to win right then and there. So again, more risk. There's so much to be weighed in such a small amount of time. So personally, would I have tried to win the game in one play? Yeah, because I'm for the plot like that. But do I understand why a defensive head coach who has a lot of trust in his defense, valid trust in his defense, then kicks that and goes to overtime? Yeah, I do.
2 points. Number one, I feel like Todd Bowles made 2 mistakes in those moments because Trey Palmer catches the ball inbounds at the Kansas City 1-yard line with 44 seconds to play, and the Buccaneers call their final timeout with 33 seconds.
I didn't like that either.
Their next 2 plays take next to no time off the clock, and they wind up scoring. Plenty of people are going to say, oh, you're thinking too much about it. In that situation, you've just got to get into the end zone and tie this game. When you're playing Patrick Mahomes, I would argue you do have to think about it that much, and you could burn more time off the clock so that you're running those game-winning plays with 17 seconds, 15 seconds, 12 seconds to go instead of 27. I think stuff like that matters.
Yeah.
The other point that I would make, though, this will be lost to history, but the Bucs almost picked Patrick Mahomes off twice.
Antoine Winfield Jr. specifically almost picked Patrick Mahomes off twice.
It would be wild if they had come away with one of those picks. Maybe you can run one play to get into field goal range and steal this thing. That's asking a lot of stuff to go right. And then once it got to overtime, Patrick Mahomes was Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs are 8-0. What else is new? I can never tell you what's going to happen between kickoff and the end of the game, but I feel very confident saying Patrick Mahomes is going to get the Chiefs over the finish line 9 times out of 10. They've done it 8 times out of 8 this season. Tampa Bay giving the best effort you could ask for, I guess, but they do fall to 4 and 5.
I was going to say, there's no moral victories.
There's no moral victories, and it doesn't get any easier for Todd Bowles and his crew because they've got the 49ers up next, but
then they get the bye, and then they hopefully get Mike Evans back. If you can go into your bye as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 500, you're good.
We're not closing the books on the Tampa Bay Bucs.
Not at all.
Which is a great place for them to be considering how it felt after that loss to the Baltimore Ravens. But for right now, they're just one more team that couldn't quite get the best of the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, with Monday Night Football out of the way, we are officially done with Week 9. Carm, I'm never gonna forgive the NFL for ruining the symmetry.
I know.
With the 16-game season,
you could go 8-8.
You had your perfect midpoint. We don't have that anymore. But we're at the midpoint of the season, okay? Yeah. Logically, the majority of teams in the NFL have played 9 games. You're either halfway through your season or more than halfway through. It is the perfect time to have a little fun. We're going to call this our mid-season award show. We did preseason awards. We took our best stab at all of the winners.
Which I hate doing. I hate it. So I hate making predictions. So now you're making me atone for it. Halfway through the season.
Does making predictions with half a season of data make you feel any better?
No. There's a lot of season left.
Do you want to do it anyway?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. So yeah, we're gonna run through it again. We did it in August. We're gonna do it in November now, taking a look at the major awards, the ones they hand out at NFL Honors, and we want to hear from y'all as well. Make sure you head over to the YouTube channel, NFL on Fox YouTube channel, where we have it open for you to vote on all of these categories. You can tell us who you think is your offensive rookie of the year, your defensive player of the year, obviously the big one, which we're saving for last, NFL MVP.
Sure.
Head on over there, vote for who you think is the worthy winner halfway through the season. Voting is open right now. Make sure you do that. In the meantime, we don't have to vote. We're just going to decide on what we think stands halfway through the year. We're going to run through the major categories, and let's, like they do at real award shows, let's get an easy one out of the way.
Okay.
You know, you do one with low stakes and an obvious outcome early to just sort of get things going. So let's start with offensive rookie of the year, which before the season felt like the easiest award to hand out. And it still is, just
but it's not the same person.
completely different player
Yeah.
has seized control of the offensive rookie of the year race. But let's look at our nominees. You're not going to find any surprises here. It's all of the guys we thought it would be. Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick. Jaden Daniels, the number 2 overall pick. Bo Nix, who was a surprise starter in Denver and has gotten the Broncos above 500.
A surprise top 12 pick also.
Also a surprise top 12 pick. And Malik Neighbors, the number 6 overall pick for the Giants. No surprises among the names.
No.
And honestly, I'm going to take this opportunity to say Caleb Williams is having a really good rookie season by most objective measures.
Yeah.
It's just a testament to the hype that was on him that it feels slightly underwhelming.
That and the fact that it doesn't look as pretty as you want it to. It doesn't look like he was eased into his rookie season, because he wasn't eased into his rookie season. Caleb Williams was thrown into the fire, and they're still betting that he can come out the other side. And for all intents and purposes, you're right. His rookie stat line is a very acceptable rookie stat line. And I except for how much he's getting beat up in the pocket. He's taken, I believe, 29 sacks through week 9. Not fun. But he was given full control of this offense in Chicago from the jump, having to make all of the pre-snap decisions, all of the decisions at the line, making protection calls, changing plays, was given the full playbook right off the bat. And that's something that has differed greatly from the guy that was taken number 2 overall.
Which, let's get to it. There's no drama here. Jaden Daniels is the runaway favorite to be the offensive rookie of the year. He's certainly the offensive rookie of the year halfway through the season. 1,900 passing yards, completing 71% of his passes, 13 total touchdowns, 9 touchdown passes, just 2 turnovers on the year. The Washington Commanders are 7-2 for the first time since 1996.
Mm-hmm.
The Hail Mary to Noah Brown, which I saw somebody call that Noah's Ark. Which
that's the most creative one I think I've heard.
Word play of the year. That's a contender for play of the year so far in the NFL.
Absolutely.
It's a no-brainer. And that's, I mean, look, follow Vegas when you want to know. Jaden was plus 500 to win this award before the season, which was second best in the NFL.
Behind Caleb Williams.
He's minus 1,400 now.
Yeah.
Like, it would be a shock if anybody other than Jaden. And my only real commentary here is, what else can he win? Because we're going to talk about MVP later. And spoilers, I'm not voting for Jaden to win MVP right now. But you cannot rule him out of that race yet, which is a remarkable thing to say about a rookie quarterback. I'd call it a long shot, but he's top 5 in passer rating in the NFL, top 3 in completion percentage. I mentioned the touchdown to turnover ratio. He's got more passing yards than Jared Goff.
He does.
He's got more passing yards than Jalen Hurts. He's just 50 passing yards behind Josh Allen. The raw touchdown totals don't add up to some of those guys.
Right.
But the Commanders also rush the ball better than a lot of teams in the league and have a ton of rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, and if you look at, I alluded to it when you talk about Caleb Williams being handed the keys to this offense and the full offense in Chicago, whereas Jaden Daniels was eased into this. And I wrote about it actually following the Fail Mary game, the Noah's Ark game, because what Jaden's performance in that game did, that last play, that Hail Mary kind of did, was erase what Caleb Williams had done in the last 2 drives of that game, which is pull the Bears ahead after not leading the entire game. He had the Bears in position to win that game with 25 seconds left, and it was going to take a miracle for the Washington Commanders to win. they got that miracle because of Jaden Daniels. But it just added to the kind of juxtaposition with how both of these quarterbacks have been handled by their respective teams. And I wrote about that then on foxsports.com, comparing and contrasting just exactly how they've eased or maybe not eased these quarterbacks into their first pro season. And in Jaden Daniels' case, if you look at the first 4 weeks of his season compared to the next 4 weeks of the season, you see upticks in pretty much everything. But what you also see is a guy that had the fourth shortest average depth of target in the first 4 weeks of the season. So he's not throwing the ball down the field. Cliff Kingsbury had him doing a lot of short passes, short progressions.
It looked very gimmicky in September.
It was almost, like nobody knew whether we should really buy what was going on there.
Right.
But if you look at the next 4 games by Jaden Daniels, he then went to the 5th longest average depth of target. He starts pushing the ball down the field. And yes, his completion percentage took a little bit of a hit because it was astronomical in those first 4 weeks of the season.
Right.
But his overall productivity spiked. And you even see things like Cliff Kingsbury easing Jaden Daniels into the play action game, which if you're not familiar, I think everybody knows what play action is, but from a quarterback perspective, especially as a young one, what play action means is that you have to turn your back to the defense, turn back around, then reset and look and see what the defense is now looking like based on the millisecond basically that passed, which there can be a lot of differences there. And then you have to kind of set your progressions and make your decisions and all that kind of stuff. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, though it can mitigate pass rush and help out the offense and get into a rhythm and all that kind of stuff. But Jaden Daniels was eased into that. So just little things where Cliff Kingsbury was making this easier on Jaden Daniels and was giving him the tools piece by piece by piece and easing him into being this professional that we're seeing now, where he's still extremely productive, but he has a ton of confidence and he's playing extraordinarily well while still being productive. And it has the Washington Commanders at the top of the NFC East.
It really does feel like it's more about what Jaden can do from here. Offensive Rookie of the Year feels like it's in the bag, which is why we, drum roll.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there any suspense to this? I really don't think there is. But yes,
not right now.
Our first half of the season, Offensive Rookie of the Year is Jaden Daniels. Can't wait to see how much higher the ceiling is. Because like I said, a lot of stuff is in play for the Commanders that we never would have dreamed. And because of it, Jaden Daniels easily running away with Offensive Rookie of the Year. Let's move on to Defensive Rookie of the Year, which was always likely to be less obvious than offensive.
It always was.
Not only that, but this is a weird year for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Only 9 defenders were drafted in the first round, and the first defender in that draft wasn't picked until number 15 overall. So you don't have that obvious candidate of the top 3, top 5, top 10 defender.
Yeah.
You kind of got you got to get a little bit weirder with it. And
that's
exactly
which I appreciate.
What this looks like. Let's take a look at our nominees. You do have the first defender taken in the draft, Laiatu Latu, the Indianapolis Colts, the edge rusher out of UCLA. We got Quinyon Mitchell, the wonderful corner for the Eagles out of Toledo. Byron Murphy, the second up in Seattle, and also in the NFC West, Jared Verse, the edge rusher who was drafted midway through the first round.
I appreciate that it's a little bit of a mix too, because you've got like a D tackle, you've got a corner, and then you've got, because usually like these defensive awards just revolve so heavily around edge rushers because they get the gaudy stats and they get the sacks and they get all of that kind of stuff, which there are 2 in here, so that's fine. But
we're kind of seeing that bear out too, because 2 weeks ago I wouldn't have been able to give you a great answer to this question.
It's true.
And then Jared Verse started announcing himself on an even bigger stage. Because I will say, as far back as week 2, we knew the guy was generating pressure.
Right.
He was among the league leaders in pressures. He just wasn't getting home. Well,
he started to get home.
2.5 of his 3.5 sacks have come in the Rams' last 2 games. He's got 33 tackles, 9 tackles for loss. He's top 10 in
fumble too.
He's top 10 in the entire NFL in total pressures. 39 is tied for 7th. That's everybody.
By PFF's metrics, actually, and if you qualify this by guys that have 100 or more snaps, he actually is up to the 5th most total pressures by their metrics. So yeah, like you're talking about a top 5 player. He also, according to Next Gen Stats, he has the league high pressure rate entering week 9, 21.2%, minimum of 100 pass rushes. So that's how they qualified it then too. So like, and that's period. That's not among rookies. That's not what that is league wide. He is leading the league in pressure percentage. Like when we talked about the Rams prior to this season and thinking about what they lost on that defense, Aaron Donald, there were so many question marks as to how you even begin to make up for that kind of loss, to replace a player like that. There's just no way it's going to be a 1-for-1 swap. And to the Rams' credit, it hasn't been a 1-to-1 swap, and they never tried to do it that way. But they are now performing at a level where this last game against their division rivals, Seattle Seahawks, the Rams defense generated season highs in pressure rate, which 59.1%, and sack rate, 15.9%.
They got some young dogs.
They have young dogs. Kobe Turner is a part of that, but you cannot lose what Jared Verse brings to this pass rush and this Rams defensive front.
You know what I keep thinking about? You remember draft weekend when they picked Jared Verse on Thursday, and then the next day they picked his college teammate out of Florida State, Braden Fisk. And remember the video?
Oh, it was so cute how they were like,
they put Verse on the phone with Fisk.
He was racing to get there.
What are the odds?
Like Braden Fisk had 6 pressures in this last game.
They were both badasses.
They're really, really good.
Fisk has 3 sacks on the season. He's got 26 pressures. Like, what are the odds that, as cool of a story as that is, that they're college teammates, that they were drafted 1-2, what are the odds that they would both hit the ground running and be guys that you can lean on from day one for the Rams? It's pretty remarkable.
It really is. And I feel like we need a nickname for these two. Like, why isn't there a nickname for them right now? I know defensive players don't really get the shine that like offensive players do, and like the Rams don't really. But there has to be something, especially also when I was, combing through all these stats, I realized the day that we are recording this is Jared Verse's 24th birthday.
Hey,
he just turned 24.
Happy birthday,
November
Jared
4th.
Verse.
So happy birthday to Jared Verse at 24 years old, leading the league in pressure percentage.
Can I stump for my preseason Defensive Rookie of the Year pick real quick?
Sure, of course.
Because I feel pretty good about my pick of Quinyon Mitchell. And I know he's not getting a lot of time in the spotlight only because he doesn't have interceptions.
Yeah.
That is literally the only reason. He is doing just fine in Philadelphia. 28 tackles, 6 pass breakups. NFL Pro, the film tool, they credit him with just 260 passing yards allowed on 19 completions.
Yeah, that's wild. Good for him.
He hasn't allowed a passing touchdown yet this season, and he's been playing regularly all year. I think there's a reason why he has the 3rd best odds in the league to win this award without interceptions. If the interceptions start to come, I like Quinyon Mitchell a lot to potentially win this award. But here at the midpoint of the season, I think the obvious answer is Jared Verse.
Birthday boy, Jared Verse.
Throw the birthday boy up on the screen. Happy birthday, Jared. You get a fake award from an NFL podcast. Please have your people get in touch with our people. Maybe, he's here in LA. Maybe he could pop on the show.
There you go.
Let's talk comeback player of the year, which, remember, the NFL reminded everyone over the summer, this is an award to be given out for a guy recovering from injury. Joe Flacco won it last year for coming back from his couch. The NFL said, "Hey, we're trying to keep this to injury related comebacks." So that's what we're gonna do and take a look. And before the season, this felt like a 2-man race.
Right.
Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins. I got to admit, it feels a little more wide open because quite a few guys coming off of injuries are having really impressive seasons. So let's take a look at the 4 guys we're talking about here. Kirk Cousins is here. Absolutely balling, coming off that Achilles injury, but also Kyler Murray after coming back from an ACL last year. J.K. Dobbins, who was one of your guys to watch in the preseason.
Yeah, I said if it wasn't going to be Kirk or Aaron, that it should be J.K. Dobbins.
Joe Burrow also here because he is balling out of his mind after missing half of last year with that wrist injury. I want to start with Joe Burrow here, mainly because I'd be curious for your thoughts. I mean, the numbers will tell you Joe Burrow, incredibly deserving. The guy's having an amazing season, 2,200 yards, 20 passing touchdowns, single-handedly trying to drag the Bengals back into playoff contention, him and Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
I don't think of him as like the odds-on favorite to win this award, mainly, and I hope this doesn't sound like insulting. I think he's capable of more than this.
Right.
Like, if anything, Joe Burrow should be on the fringe of the MVP conversation. And like, if he can get the Bengals back above 500 and get them into the mix to potentially win the division, that's the level that he's playing on. I know he technically is coming back from a serious injury,
Right.
but what he's doing with Cincinnati right now, what him and Jamar Chase are doing, it goes beyond comeback to me. Like, I really think he's more of a fringe MVP candidate.
Can I offer perhaps a more even cynical approach than that?
Yeah, sure.
I think what Joe Burrow is battling right now isn't necessarily like comeback player of the year because he's been injured before. And I think there was a lot to be made about the fact that this year he has to stay healthy in order to not get the injury prone narrative attached to him. So
Sure.
now it's like it almost knocks him out of like the comeback player for me because I'm like, well, what we're really looking for is A, MVP caliber play because we know that he's capable of that. But B, we just need him to stay on the field. And that's kind of like a prerequisite for Joe Burrow going forward. So it's almost a cynical way of kind of looking at it, which I don't mean that as any disrespect to Joe Burrow. I think both you and I are saying essentially the same thing, which is we expect him to be in the MVP mix, and he is playing like he should be. He just needs his team, the rest of his team, to cooperate a little bit more to get him like kind of that team success that comes along with a lot of those MVP candidates. But so far, so good. Knock on all the wood with Joe Burrow, because all I want is for Joe Burrow to stay healthy and continue at this level of play for the foreseeable future.
I know we record this on Monday before we kind of flip our schedules forward to the next week, but you know who Cincinnati has on deck, right?
Yeah.
It's
Do I?
Baltimore on Thursday
I was going to say,
night.
it's Baltimore on Thursday night. That's right.
Baltimore at Baltimore on Thursday night. So for everything that's gone wrong for Cincinnati, a huge opportunity. I've never seen somebody as pissed off in a big win as Joe Burrow was about beating the Raiders the other day.
Yes.
Like, he looked furious.
He was.
Everyone.
He was fuming on that sideline late into the game after they'd locked it up. Like, it wasn't pretty. But I appreciate that because he clearly has higher expectations for how the Bengals are doing. So more power to him.
That's the standard he's holding himself to. Kyler Murray having a phenomenal season. I feel weird voting for him for comeback player of the year just because he did play 8 games in 2023.
Right.
Not to at all take away from the accomplishment of coming back from that injury. And he has had a fantastic season. The Cardinals are on top of their division, but he did get his feet wet last year. He was able to return and play football last year. J.K. Dobbins is a great story, but let's not bury the lead any longer.
Yeah.
Because shocker of shockers, one of the preseason favorites to win this award, Kirk Cousins, is playing exactly like we hoped that he could.
Who knew that the guy that tore his Achilles later in the season would come back better and stronger than the one that had been talking about coming back? So
okay, I want to get to that. But to your point, Kirk Cousins, 36 years old, tears the Achilles around Halloween last year. It's just now been a year. He looked like a guy who couldn't move in the pocket as recently as week 1.
Yeah.
Like,
we were all very concerned.
You spent a little bit of time like, man, is this going to be a total disaster for Kirk Cousins? Fast forward 2 months, the guy is leading the Falcons to 6-3. I'm not going to say they've got the NFC South locked up, but man, do they have...
They're starting to pull away.
They have the inside track on that division, completing 69% of his passes. Really nice stuff. 2,300 passing yards, 17 touchdowns. He's been everything you could have hoped he would be.
He is on pace for his third most passing yards and touchdown totals of his career, coming off of an ACL or Achilles injury at the age of 35. 36
a
years
decade
old.
plus into
Yeah.
his career. I mean, the guy got drafted in 20.
Yeah, he's flirting with his third best season of his career right now.
So, needless to say, based on it, we're going with Kirk Cousins. Can we give Kirk his nice graphic here? Hell yeah, Kirk O'Chains, embracing. The guy
He's
learned
rapping rap
what
songs
swag
in the
surfing
tunnel.
was this year.
He did, and he's talking about walking in people's traps and taking over their traps in the tunnel, just like with his teammates. He's assimilated into Atlanta culture, which is hysterical given that if you I covered Kirk when he was part of Minnesota, and he fit into Minnesota and Minnesota, Midwest nice, because he's from the suburbs of Chicago, went to Michigan State. He is the definition of Midwest nice. And then he goes to Atlanta and somehow
He's a chameleon.
He's
a chameleon.
Incredible. He fits in wherever, and he's got this team behind him.
Can I play devil's advocate for 5 seconds?
Yeah.
Because I'm having a hard time letting go of my Jets priors from before the season.
You know what's wrong with all of about the Jets right now?
I was just curious. You know how Pro Football Reference and StatHead will let you compare players head to head? Aaron Rodgers' season is not far off from Kirk Cousins. 2 fewer passing touchdowns, 20 fewer passing yards per game. Not as good of a completion percentage, but still up in the 60s. The only difference is the record. And that matters.
Which matters a lot.
I'm just saying, if the Jets manage to pull it together, not that I think they will, but I'm just saying Aaron Rodgers is not playing poorly, considering that he is coming off of the same injury.
All right, I see your point, but I'm going to counter it a little bit, because Aaron Rodgers is his own worst enemy then when it comes to this, because we think of what Aaron Rodgers is capable of as so much higher than what we've seen this year.
4-time MVP.
Exactly. He's a 4-time league MVP. So for him to win comeback player, he needs to look like that player again. And he does not look like that player right now. He looks like a very good, solid quarterback. But also there's a vibe check to be had here that's just not.
And I will say too, having just annoyingly argued for A-Rod once again, Kirk has his team in position to cruise to the division title and have a home playoff game. And it's not out of the question that they could fight for the bye as well.
Right.
The Jets are facing an uphill battle to even be in the wild card mix, let alone win a division.
And part of that is that their division is tougher, and I get that, whatever, but they have to get past the Bills and who knows what the Dolphins are going to become at this point.
Not to we won't take Kirk's shine any longer, because he is a deserving midpoint comeback player of the year. Really cool story in Atlanta. All right, let's get into the big 3 awards, starting with defensive player of the year. And I think this category has the most potential to change between now and the end of the season, because it's been a remarkable first half, and you've had injuries to guys like Aiden Hutchinson, Micah Parsons, a couple of the guys that we thought were really going to factor into this race, unfortunately just haven't been healthy.
Yeah, which Aiden Hutchinson would have probably been running away with this.
Aiden Hutchinson was the runaway favorite 3-4 weeks ago, and it sucks that he's out for the rest of the year. Micah also hasn't been seen since I think it was week 4 when he went out against the New York Giants. Just a rough year. Myles Garrett just now getting, on pace. He had a wonderful game the other day against the Chargers. I don't know if that's too little, too late. The point being, the field looks a little bit different than what we might have expected. So let's throw up our big 4 here. Couple of them are very obvious and easy to predict. TJ Watt, shocker of shockers, back in the middle of the defensive player of the year race. Yeah. Will Anderson, who a lot of people expected to take the next step, sure as hell doing it. 7.5 sacks on the year.
Yeah, I think he's benefiting from playing on the other side of Danielle Hunter.
Shocking. Then there's 2 more unconventional names. Xavier McKinney, who's up to 6 interceptions already since joining the Packers as a free agent. Yeah. I think he had 1 in his first, first 5 games.
Yeah, and dating back to last season, he had 6 straight games with 1 interception, which tied the NFL record, I believe. And he was 1 game away from being in sole possession and breaking that record. But
it's been a long, long time since a safety won Defensive Player
It
of the
was
Year.
so funny too because the Green Bay Packers don't go out and spend money on free agents. This was very uncharacteristic, but the safety position in Jeff Hafley's defense, which is a drastically different scheme than what Green Bay has seen over the last literally 15 years, it hinges on the safety position. So they went out and they got a guy in Xavier McKinney that was going to have to be immediately productive, the immediate leader, despite the fact that he's new to Green Bay, and he has delivered for them already. He is worth every penny of that new contract. He is the engine that makes that entire defense go at this point, because they did struggle for a large part of the first part of the season to get pressure up front. But Xavier McKinney, because of how much he was taking the ball away and how much that secondary in general was taking the ball away, Green Bay didn't feel it. It was still a unit that the offense could very much rely on.
You know what's funny? This is a completely different conversation. The Packers don't like to spend on big free agents. They're a draft and develop team.
Yeah.
When they do,
it works out for them.
Works.
I know.
Xavier McKinney is in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. Josh Jacobs, 760 rushing yards through the halfway point of the season.
Yeah.
Going back a few years, Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith, objectively great free agent signings when they brought them in a few years ago. I'm not saying you need to do it every year. Honestly, I think this is probably the right way to do it.
Yeah, I think so
when
too.
Identify a guy that you feel great about, that you think is going to work in the scheme that you have.
Yeah.
Man, when the Packers take these swings, they are always like doubles and home runs.
It's so funny too, because you look at, they're like, oh, well, they've drafted their last 3 franchise quarterbacks. That's the most expensive position. Like, of course they can get away with doing this, that, the other. The reality of it is they wasted the first 3 years of Jordan Love's contract. They had to pay him after just a year of him starting, and now he is one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. It's so funny to me, just the way that Green Bay operates, but it works for them and probably only them. Given the very unique set of circumstances that the Packers operate under, whether it be the 100,000 person town that they reside in, which is, if you've never been to Lambeau, it's literally in a neighborhood, or not having ownership.
It's been a long time since a safety won Defensive Player of the Year. Absolutely in play if Xavier McKinney keeps this up. But what about a nose tackle? And look, I know Aaron Donald won Defensive Player of the Year plenty playing defensive tackle, but that's not what we're talking about here. That's 3 technique pass rushing defensive tackle. What about Dexter Lawrence? 9 sacks as a nose tackle, as a space eater.
Sexy Dexy, look at that man.
Playing like one of the absolute best defenders in the league from a position that never gets any love. Well, we're going to change that today.
9 sacks through the halfway point of a season from an interior defensive lineman. That would be incredible for an interior defensive lineman at the end of a season. The fact that we're halfway into this thing, and that is, I know that we wanted that the Giants are the butt of so many different jokes, but they have a really good defensive front. It's one of the best in the league. In fact, they lead the league in sacks right now with 32.5. So this is a strength of this team. And Dexter Lawrence is making it go. 9 sacks from his position just boggles my mind. He's got the second highest pass rush productivity score. Try saying that 5 times fast, from PFF, behind only 35-year-old Cam Hayward, by the way, whose teammate was on this list, but Cam Hayward should probably also be on this list for what he's been doing for that Pittsburgh defense, especially at the big age that he is. I can't say enough about Dexter Lawrence, though, and I can't say enough about this Giants defensive front that, against all odds, when everything is crumbling around them, they are an extraordinarily productive unit.
And I would argue he's the engine of that thing.
He is,
like,
absolutely.
Not to take any credit away from Brian Burns. He's a phenomenal player, but Dexter Lawrence is being double teamed on 65% of his pass rush snaps. It leads the league by a significant margin. He's top 15 in total pressures, which I believe there's only one other interior defensive lineman, Zach Allen in Denver, who's even close.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth pointing out the Giants are bad. And that matters because so much sack production comes when you're on a good team with a lead.
Yeah.
The Giants have only had the lead in the second half 3 times this year. Dexter Lawrence is producing despite all of that.
Every time I just think it can't get worse in New York. I hear a stat like that. But you're totally right. And if you think about too, I mean, I guess this probably sways the stats in another direction, but the defense is on the field for quite a bit of time. Like the offense isn't really helping them out here, but that can go one of two ways. Obviously, if you have more snaps, law of averages says that you would be gaining more stats, but it also means that you're tired, man. Like if you're on the field and you're in sudden change situations and you're having to, you're losing the time of possession battle so horribly like the Giants do, you can absolutely kind of lose steam. And we just haven't seen that from Dexter Lawrence.
Ironically, we're talking about Dexter Lawrence after his worst game. Washington had an amazing plan for double teaming him and taking him out of that game. He probably made his smallest impact of the year in this most, I mean, exactly.
Right.
But this is still a guy who, and by the way, Washington had a great plan because that's where your plan has to start.
Which is incredible to have the New York game plan for a nose tackle.
Having said all of this wonderful stuff, I don't trust us as a football viewing public to award Defensive Player of the Year to a nose tackle on a bad team. I really think TJ Watt, of all of the guys, I like his chances to be the winner when it's all said and done. 6.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles. More than that, I can count already multiple games that he has single-handedly wrecked and swung in Pittsburgh's favor. He did it against the Giants a couple weeks ago. He did it in week 1 against Atlanta, where the Falcons just had no answer for him coming off the left side. And he plays for a team that's leading its division and will be a factor in the playoff race.
Yes.
Unfortunately, all of that stuff matters. And if you were asking me to say who's going to win at the end of the year.
Yeah, if you're asking me to predict, then I'm with you. But
that's not the point of this show. This is the midseason award show. And without further ado, throw Sexy Dexy's photo up on our board here because he is a deserving midseason defensive player of the year.
Excellence, as our friend Michael Jr. would like to say. That applies to defensive linemen as well. It's mostly used for offensive, but it applies to defensive linemen too.
If he keeps this up, he is a deserving winner, and I hope people can look past the Giants' record and recognize that. On the other side of the ball, we've got Offensive Player of the Year, which, as you might guess, there's a plethora of amazing wide receivers to talk about in this category. But as we alluded to in the Week 9 recap episode, running backs are making a surge here, Carmen. 2 in particular are having themselves a year. And maybe, Christian McCaffrey won the award last year. Maybe we see another running back take it home this year. Here are our 4 contenders. We got Jamar Chase. We got Saquon Barkley, we got CeeDee Lamb, and we got Derrick Henry. I'm guessing I'll hear from some Vikings fans, maybe Justin Jefferson. Nico Collins is a guy worth talking about prior to the hamstring injury. In any given, from here, for as long as the game is the way it is, we're going to have about 6 receivers to talk about in this category.
Actually, and in Detroit's case, you got another couple running backs that probably have a case at this point too.
Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Kyron Williams with 10 touchdowns on the year. I think that's probably worth mentioning. Having said all of those nice things to all of those guys, maybe I should draw this out for more suspense. This feels like it begins and ends with Derrick Henry for me.
Yeah, no,
what he's doing is nothing short of remarkable. I mean, 1,000 yards on the year already, 13 total touchdowns. He's got a shot, and that's 13 total. He's got 11 rushing. 11 rushing is among the league leaders for an entire season in a lot of years.
Yes.
He's got a shot to be the first running back to rush for 20 touchdowns since LaDainian Tomlinson had 28 in 2006. I know, I shouldn't get ahead of myself like that, but when you look at the clip this guy's on, he's the first player in NFL history with a touchdown in each of his first 9 games. I don't think the Ravens are going to forget to give him the ball in the red zone, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean, and why would they? This guy it's so funny to me though, like when you put his career in perspective, because like in real time, rightfully so, what he's doing is stupid. Compliment. He's just
Compliment.
he's just outrageously productive. And then you say things like, yeah, he's the first guy to do it since LaDainian Tomlinson, or like a lot of times it's since Adrian Peterson. And you're just like, we've seen stuff like this before, but we haven't seen it in a while in a league that has promoted the pass in the way that the NFL has. And now that you're right, it's coming back around. We're seeing teams utilizing their backs a little bit more, or their offensive backfield a little bit more, because defenses are no longer equipped to handle these guys. And they're certainly not equipped to handle a guy like Derrick Henry, who has the fifth most missed tackles forced in the run with 33 at this point. He's tied for the second most explosive runs. So he is still being productive on the field. The Ravens are scoring the second most points in the league behind the Detroit Lions. Their offense as a whole, like when you think of these run first offenses, you don't think of high flying, gaudy, crazy stats, all this scoring production, yada, yada, yada. But the Ravens are proving us all wrong. And it's because a lot of what Lamar Jackson is doing, but it's because of what Derrick Henry is doing and how productive he is despite being a running back.
My video game players think that this is unrealistic. They're like, come on, man, adjust the sliders. Like that's the type of season we're talking about here. And it's not even like he's just vulturing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line. This is, and we could just read off crazy Derrick Henry stats for the rest of the segment, but this one is my favorite. Shout out to my guy, Sheil Kapadia of The Ringer. I saw him tweet this on Monday. Henry has 12 runs of 20-plus yards so far this season. That's more than any player had all of last year. I'm looking at his game logs right now. He's got a long of 20-plus in 8 of their 9 games. It's amazing to think back that the Chiefs did as good of a job as they did holding him in check. And even then, I would argue, and that is the one thing that I worry about, I would argue the Ravens a couple of times have kind of forgotten about him. Like you get out of a loss to
Especially
the Chiefs.
Early, I was a little trepidatious early on because I didn't feel like they were using him and Lamar correctly, but they've quickly rectified that. Todd Monken knows what he's doing.
They sure seem to have figured it out. 2,000 rushing yards is on the table. Like I said, 20-plus rushing touchdowns is on the table. It's not a knock, and I mean, we can talk about some of these other guys. I deeply admire, after all of the consternation about Jamar Chase and like, would he play? Would he not play? Is he going to get his deal? Is he not going to get his deal? He's going to make the Bengals pay every dime of that record-shattering
That's why
contract.
I had him as like preseason.
He was your preseason
He was
player,
my preseason offensive player of the year because not only, Joe Burrow healthy, you thought that offense was going to get off to a fast start, and it did. It's just the defense can't keep up. But yeah, Jamar Chase is in a contract year, so he has everything to prove at this point. Why the Cincinnati Bengals did not pay him prior to this season is going to go down as one of the most idiotic decisions that you could have made, because there was just so little chance that Jamar Chase wasn't going to be just a hugely productive player, a focal point of this offense. It's his bestie with Joe Burrow. And that's the other thing too. It's not that Jamar is it's just Jamar thinking about how he's in a contract year. You better believe Joe Burrow wants Jamar to get paid too. And so he is absolutely doing everything he can as Jamar's quarterback to get him paid. So why in the world you wouldn't have tried to lock this deal up as soon as you possibly could just is completely beyond me. But yeah, I mean, this is going to go one of two ways at the end of the year. When you talk about offensive player of the year, so often we see it being a receiver because of the impact that they have and the gaudy stats again. But like I was talking about with Derrick Henry, we're seeing running backs still match the production of receivers when it comes to total touchdowns and yardage and all this other crazy stuff. When you're talking about a 2,000-yard player, it's impressive whether that came through the air or on the ground. It's arguably more impressive if it came on the ground.
That is another crazy thing worth considering. I mean, Christian McCaffrey had a phenomenal season last year running the ball, but he's also the best dual threat running back in the NFL, and he adds so much value as a receiver.
Sure.
Derrick Henry will catch a ball here and there, but he's doing the lion's share of his work.
Sure is.
Pounding the rock. And he's going to have similar numbers despite being a more, I don't want to call him one-dimensional, but just being a more run-heavy player.
Right.
Like we're not getting here all the same way, and he's still just as productive. And that's why it's another one that's not very suspenseful. You can throw it up on the board. I think Derrick Henry is one of the defining stories in the NFL this season, and he's my midpoint offensive player of the year. I'd be really surprised if he tapers off. And passing game production can be so finicky, right?
Right.
Ain't nothing finicky about handing the football to Derrick Henry 18 to 25 times
football,
a game.
It's football in its purest form when you're watching Derrick Henry pound the rock, as you said.
That leaves just one more award, the big one.
Yeah.
The one we spend all of our bandwidth arguing about, if we're being real. That would be NFL MVP, which more and more these days has become the best quarterback on the best team award.
Yep.
And man, if there aren't some amazing choices. So without further ado, if you could throw up our candidates, take a look at them. And wouldn't you know?
Yeah.
It's 4 of the best quarterbacks on 4 of the best teams. You got Jared Goff, obviously a front runner, Lamar Jackson, a front runner, Josh Allen sneaking up right behind them. And lo and behold, nice few games for the Philadelphia Eagles. Getting
how things can change.
Getting A.J. Brown back, working wonders. Devontae Smith having a phenomenal game against Jacksonville. And Jalen Hurts, you can scoff at it if you want to. He's right in the mix as long as the Eagles keep doing what they're doing.
It's really funny, though, that like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts are on this list for like completely different reasons. Like
Expound.
I will expound. Jalen Hurts was rightfully so struggling without his top 2 receivers or AJ Brown in and out of the lineup, all that kind of stuff. Like the Philadelphia Eagles were injured. So was their offensive line, all of that, whatever. So naturally, when all those guys come back in, Jalen Hurts' production upticks and he looks as great as ever. Right. And he's capitalizing on, and I'm not ever going to fault a guy for the team that he has around him. But then you look at Josh Allen, and for much of the season, and even last week, because Amari Cooper was out, he had a rookie as his wide receiver one, essentially. Like he lost so much from that offense in the offseason. He is willing his team to all of these wins. He's gutting them out himself. He's doing everything that we know Josh Allen is capable of doing. He is elevating all of those players around him, and he's doing it anyway, despite the fact that there were so many things working against the Bills coming into this season between injury, departures, all of that kind of stuff. And the defense has been holding up its end of the bargain despite losing Matt Milano in the beginning of the year. But Josh Allen looks fantastic because he is the one that is dragging the rest of his team along with him. Plus James Cook too. I want to shout out their run game as well.
It is interesting. It feels to me, and I don't want to say the Bills are like forgotten about. Everybody knows they're a good team. They're leading their division. They're basically a lock to make the playoffs already. But it is kind of flying under the radar, in my opinion, that Josh Allen is doing exactly what we said he needed to do for the Bills to be contenders.
Yes.
And they're winning, by the way. Remember, last year started out nightmarishly. Is that a word?
Yeah.
They were 6-6 at the bye. They had to fire their offensive coordinator.
The rare scenario where it was an addition by a subtraction, which never happens.
But Josh had to make that late surge to even be in the conversation. This year, I mean, he's already at 2,000 passing yards, 20 touchdowns on the year when you throw in the rushing touchdowns. More importantly, the Bills are winning. And yeah, what you just said, that was the storyline all year is you trade Stephon Diggs away and it's like, well, can Josh elevate this cast of role players into a cohesive thing? And of course there have been struggles. I'm well aware Baltimore whooped their ass and he really struggled against the Houston Texans as well. But they are on the doorstep of clinching their division before we even get to the holidays. And Josh is playing like an MVP candidate. And I'm a little surprised that he's not more talked about, I guess.
Well, again, victim of his own kind of making, because like we've now come to expect this kind of stuff, out of Josh Allen. And there was the question mark going into the season was like, all right, do we actually think that he is this good of a player that he can elevate the team around him? That's kind of what separates the good to great players from the great to elite players. And now that he's doing that, we're like, yeah, that makes sense. It's Josh Allen. He's really good. Like,
which is not fair, by the way.
Absolutely not fair. And we should absolutely be talking about it more. Let me be very crystal clear. I am a huge fan of Joshy. You and I both have been a little bit more bullish on the Bills. Did I do something there? I might have done something there. A little more bullish on the Bills.
I see what you did there.
Than most were coming into this season. But yeah, I mean, now it's just like, no, this is what I thought. So there's no like surprise or like wow factor to it, because you're like, yeah, this is who Josh Allen is.
The other thing that's working against him is that two guys, and maybe even just one guy, are rewriting what we thought quarterbacks were capable of doing.
Yeah.
Jared Goff, definitely one of them. I will say, I really feel like the Detroit Lions are flexing the totality of their muscle in a way that unfortunately lessens the influence on the quarterback. Like when you talk about scoring 50 points the other day with 200 yards of offense.
And Jared Goff had 15 pass attempts, didn't even break 100 yards passing. He did throw for 3 touchdowns, but then he also gave up a touchdown pass to David Montgomery, who then passed the ball to Sam Laporta for a touchdown. You're right. It's like he's a victim of his own. Like
he's a victim of being on arguably the best roster in the NFL.
They did it with the best play caller, all of that.
They did it against Green Bay as well. The running game really took over in those wet conditions. Not a game where you're going to wing the ball around all day long.
Jared Goff was not afraid to throw that ball either, especially in the beginning part of that game, even with the weather being what it was. The way that the Lions are winning too they are dominating in every sense of the word. And it's to the point where I keep joking about this, but it's like, it's true. Ben Johnson has like a blood feud with every single opponent that he goes against. And he picks out something that either you do really well and he says, nah, I could do that better. Or he picks out one of your major weaknesses and exploits the ever-loving you-know-what out of it. Like, they are playing with their food. This doesn't look hard for them. They're winning at will, the Detroit Lions are. And it's incredible to me to see that they seemingly get better every week and find some new wrinkle and add in these new fun little gadget packages and trick plays and whatever it is. And Jared Goff, though, gets a little bit, his shine gets a little dulled. But the Jared Goff we see now, and this is why I do think that he is a legitimate MVP contender, because if you look at the Jared Goff we see now, this doesn't work unless he is a very highly intelligent, anticipatory, high kind of football IQ player, making the right decisions and distributing the ball where it needs to go when it needs to go there. And that's not something we historically associated with Jared Goff when he was the number 1 overall pick going to the Rams. We talked about his processing power. He didn't get through his progressions fast enough. He wasn't making the best decisions that he needed to be. And that's why essentially Los Angeles gave up on him. And then to see him come to Detroit and then be put in a favorable situation and completely change the narrative as to what kind of player he is, to the point where he is dismantling a Brian Flores defense in Minnesota that very few guys have been able to figure out. It's so incredibly impressive, and he absolutely deserves that MVP consideration.
You realize his worst completion percentage over the last 5 weeks is 72%?
Dude.
Quote unquote,
outrageous.
Quote unquote, his worst performance in the last month plus was going 18 of 25 for 303 touchdowns against Dallas. Like, that's the type of stuff that we're talking about here.
He's also making the players around him better. Amon-Ra St. Brown, for instance, will have an offensive player of the year case because of Jared Goff. This last game caught all 7 of his targets for 56 yards, touchdown, right? He is now on a catch streak of 30 with Jared Goff. The last 30 times Jared Goff has targeted Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown has caught that ball.
Is that good?
I don't know, guys. Is that good?
Is that good?
Is that good?
It's unreal.
The chances of St. Brown catching, this is from NGS, catching all 30 of those targets in a row based on the difficulty of each pass is just 1 in 780,000. It's
That's
silly.
Good. I love so much too. You couldn't have drawn up a better game to take the Lions down a peg than Sunday. You know, Lambeau Field has been a house of horrors for them
first
historically.
First outdoor game.
It's rainy. You couldn't have drawn it up in a lab better to be the game that knocked them off track.
They didn't look like the team that played indoors. No, I'll tell you that much.
They didn't look like they gave a damn.
They didn't.
They are so
very
impressive.
Much did not.
And yet,
for all those wonderful things we just said,
well, Jared Goff might not be having the most efficient season in the league.
I know.
Because the other guy is Lamar Jackson, who, much like his teammate Derrick Henry, I don't even know where to start. I mean, the raw numbers are incredible. 2,300 yards already. He's on pace to shatter his yardage total. Remember, for everything Lamar's accomplished, 2-time MVP, never had a 4,000 yard season. On pace to shatter that. He's on pace with 20 touchdowns, 20 passing touchdowns already. He's on pace to have his career high for passing touchdowns. He could get to 40 with the right breaks. That's not out of the realm of possibility. Sunday against Denver, he posted a perfect passer rating. You know, he is now tied with Ben Roethlisberger for the most ever. He's been above 100 passer rating in 7 out of his 9 games this year. He's been at 120 or better in more than half of his games. 5 games this year where he's completed 70% or better. So hasn't had like the 100% game like Jared Goff, but those numbers are right there on pace. He's had multiple touchdowns in 6 of Baltimore's 9 games this year. You want me to keep going?
Well, I've got my own. Can I get a word in about why Lamar Jackson is absolutely insane? No, it's the way that he's doing things, because you mentioned, yes, Jared Goff has been on this complete, like he's on target. He is so efficient because of his completion percentage. But you've also mentioned that Lamar Jackson has a phenomenal completion percentage, but he's taking care of the football. He has only had 4 turnover-worthy plays according to PFF this year, right? Which is the second lowest turnover-worthy throw percentage rate at 1.3% behind just Joe Burrow, by the way. But he's doing this and taking care of the football, all while he leads the league in passing yards per attempt at 8.8. He has the 4th most scrambles of any quarterback. And so it's not as if he's playing this dink and dunk kind of game where he's just going down the field. He is pushing the ball down the field. He is throwing on the run. He has all of this incredible passing production, but while also just being so incredibly accurate and efficient and not putting his offense or his defense, for that matter, in any sort of precarious situations. It's really incredible. And then to add on to this, to add more context to how good Lamar Jackson is, you look at the pieces around him, and yes, we talked about Derrick Henry potentially getting Offensive Player of the Year, and that is what thing. But
well, we're going to talk more about that.
We are. But Lamar and Derrick, for that matter, are doing this with a good, solid offensive line, but nothing great.
They lost 3 starters off of last year's team.
Lost 3 starters. They are 15th in the league in PFF grade, 14th in run blocking grade, and yet between Derrick Henry and Lamar, it's an incredible feat, because you think about Jared Goff, who is behind one of, if not the best offensive line in football, and how important what Detroit does, or how important that offensive line is to what Detroit does. The same could be said that this Ravens offense doesn't go without an offensive line that is good to great to elite. And yet neither Lamar Jackson or Derrick Henry are using the excuse that they are good. They are outperforming everything around them.
I think that's going to be the crux of this MVP debate. Well, for starters, for all the wonderful things we've said about them, the Ravens have 2 baffling losses on their resume. They're a wild card right now.
Right.
MVPs don't usually get handed to wild card teams. That's just a fact. I'm just saying.
No, you're right.
Baltimore has 2 mystifying losses on its resume. And that does matter when you get to the end of the year and you're trying to split hairs in resumes like Jared Goff's and Josh Allen's and Lamar Jackson. So that's number 1. It gets more confusing by the week that they lost to Vegas in particular.
I can't fathom that.
On top of that, you're going to have to decide, you listening, you watching, and everybody, like how you feel about Derrick Henry's impact on the Ravens. Obviously, having that threat in the run game makes this whole thing go, in my opinion. Not obviously Lamar could win an MVP without Derrick Henry. He's already done it. But just how explosive they are in the passing game, how much it opens everything up for him over the middle of the field, that's a key factor. But to your point, Jared Goff has all of that around him, that incredible play caller in Detroit. So all of these guys have something you can point to and say, but what about that?
They're not single-handedly doing, except for, I guess, Josh Allen.
If you're looking for the quarterback who's doing the most with the least,
it's Josh Allen.
I'm going to just keep steadily beating the drum for Josh Allen.
Fair.
But halfway through the season, even with the weird losses,
I mean, the Ravens still lead the league. Their offense still leads the league in yards per play, rushing yards per play, passing yards per play, first downs per game, red zone percentage. They're averaging the 2nd most points behind the Detroit Lions.
And that is exactly why I have no problem saying Lamar is your midseason MVP. Derrick Henry is your midseason offensive player of the year. I think both things are possible. And it speaks to how silly this team has been. And to your point, they did it despite some attrition on their offense. They had to overcome that. I'll admit it. I was worried about them heading into the year because it felt like a lot to lose.
Yeah.
Not so much. No. They are incredible. I'll say it one more time. They got some stuff to clean up because they should be 7-1, really. And they are, or excuse me, no, they should be 8-1. The 17 game set schedule throws me off every time.
It really does.
They should be
bye weeks. Bye weeks are a little bit like, there's a lot of teams that have them early, and it's
they should be 8-1. They're 6-3 instead. That type of stuff matters when you're splitting hairs in the MVP race. But Lamar Jackson, just absolutely incredible start to this season, and it's easy for me to believe he repeats as MVP if he keeps this up. All right, that is our awards ballot. We would love to hear from you. I said it at the top. I'll say it again. Fan voting is open on our YouTube channel. So head over to the NFL on Fox YouTube channel. You can vote on all these categories. Let us know what we got right, what we got wrong. We'll see how the second half of the season goes. Next time we do this, we should actually just know the award winners. One last thing to get to before we wrap the show, and you know what it is. It's the power rankings. Thought for the briefest of moments we were going to have a new number 1 team on Monday night, but we don't. Kansas City Chiefs reign supreme, undefeated, still at the top of the power rankings once again. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about everybody else. Let's look through the league, see who some of the big movers and shakers are as we move on to week 10. I'm going to start down at the bottom like I like to do. The team just had a rough go of it. It's been a journey for the Saints, man. I had them real low at the start of the year, too low, because I do maintain that this was a good team when everybody was healthy. They climbed as high as the top 10, and now in week 10, they are in dead last place. That's what happens when you go on the road and you lose to the Carolina Panthers, to lose your 7th straight game. Dennis Allen let go, as we discussed earlier in the show. Feels like rock bottom when your players are tweeting from the stadium how embarrassing it is that they just lost to the Panthers. It's rock bottom for the Saints. They are a fitting number 32 this week. We'll see how they rebound. Shout out to the Panthers. Bryce Young climbing up 2 spots. Let's talk about 2 AFC East teams with curious placement here. I jumped the Jets very high. I jumped them up 8 spots to number 22 for their win against the Houston Texans. And I'm not trying to sell you Jets copium right now. They got a lot of work left to do. They still only played one good half of football against Houston. First half of Thursday night was yucky. But you look through the teams, the teams at the bottom of the NFL, teams that are well under 500, your Saints, your Panthers, your Titans, your New York Giants, on and on and on. The Jets have a better case for optimism than anybody. They still have a talented roster. They have a healthy quarterback. They've got more talent on offense than your average bottom-dwelling team. The potential is there. That's all I'm saying. Doesn't mean that they're going to realize it, but I feel better about them than I do about probably a third of the NFL. It's more of a statement of how bad they are than how good the Jets are, but we'll see where they go. And then right above them, I have now moved the Miami Dolphins up consecutively after losses. They're 0-2 since Tua returned from his concussion. But man, they look like a better team. I mean, you push the Buffalo Bills to the brink on the road, 27 points in back-to-back weeks. They are better than your average 2-6 team. Again, we'll see what they do with that. They've got another tough one against the Rams coming up. They might fall all the way to 2-7, but eventually the schedule's going to get a little more favorable. They're going to have a chance to stack wins because as long as Tua is healthy, this is a good football team. Just like the Jets, I feel a hell of a lot better about the Dolphins with a healthy Tua than I feel about a lot of other teams. Just a lot of work to do to dig out of that hole. Jumping up in the number 12 spot, I've slow played the Chargers a little bit, but I'm moving them up to number 12. At the very least, I believe that their defense is the real deal, one of the very best in the NFL. And Justin Herbert is quietly having a badass season, just playing like an ultra talented, confident quarterback. It's not flashy, but it's a recipe for success. I'm not saying the Browns are world beaters, but Cleveland looked explosive against Baltimore. Granted, a leaky Baltimore defense. I get it, but LA completely shut them down. This is not a high ceiling team, I don't think, but a team with a remarkably high floor, considering they went into the year looking like they were sort of rebooting things. If this is the Chargers rebooting, makes me excited for year 2 of the Jim Harbaugh era. Want to finish it off with a team that moves into the top 10 this week. I moved the Steelers up during their bye. They are very interesting for one specific reason. Steelers haven't played a team with a winning record since week 3 when they lost to the Indianapolis Colts. Clearly, a lot of stuff has changed since then. Namely, they made a quarterback switch. They look a lot more explosive on offense. They're 6-2. They are rested up, and they have 2 huge games coming up. It's the Commanders this week, chance to go against the superstar Jaden Daniels. And then right after that, they get Baltimore. Big division game against Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Big chance for the Steelers to show us just how much better this quarterback change has made them. And shoot, for that matter, by the time you're listening to this, maybe they'll have made a deadline trade for a wide receiver. We've heard them linked to damn near every single one of them. Maybe the Steelers make a move before the deadline to add a little bit more to their offense. But either way, huge opportunity coming up for the Steelers to show us, are you a legit contender or are you more so just kind of part of the pack? Very excited to find out here with these 2 big games coming up. Like I said, the top of this power rankings looks very similar to what it did last week, namely the Kansas City Chiefs. Hang on one more time. That does it for power rankings. That does it for a loaded episode coming out of week 9. All of that hay is in the barn. And we're going to turn around and have so much more because at the very least, we'll be reacting to the trade deadline, all of the news coming out of Tuesday. And yes, we will be previewing week 10 on Thursday. We'll have Peter Schrager. We'll have our usual chat with Greg Olson. Get you ready for all things week 10 moving into the weekend. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so that is in your feed on Thursday when it's ready for you. Go give us a follow on the socials at NFL on Fox Pod. We appreciate it. I said it earlier, but if you want to go hit the YouTube channel and vote on our midseason awards, leave a comment, leave a review, leave a rating, all of that fun stuff. We appreciate it. Appreciate any support so much. Love doing this show for y'all. Hopefully you enjoy listening, and you can listen again on Thursday when we are back in your feed. Until then, I appreciate it, and I'll talk to y'all real soon.